Even as a little girl, Robelia thought that she was the main character in this world. The girl was given beautiful shoes and gorgeous lace dresses, delicate puddings sprinkled with tiny pieces of sugar. Robelia's parents loved her more than anything in the world. The heroine believed she was the happiest person in the world. But after reading the book, Robelia learned the truth, and her father died suddenly. And the whole world turned against the main character. When Robelia was 3 years old, her father, James Ephalentia, lay in a cold coffin. Rumors swirled that he had been murdered, but no evidence was ever found. The wealth of the Ephalentia family passed to Countess Julia, and the residents were indignant, because according to the same rumors, Julia was considered a half-breed gypsy. As a result, many people began to lay their eyes on the Ephalentia family's inheritance. It was then that a hero arrived who silenced the villagers. The hero turned out to be James's brother and Robelia's uncle, Malone. Malone understood that the inhabitants wanted the inheritance, so if Julia wanted to get it, the woman would have to remarry him. Malone insisted that they were from the same family and should protect Robelia from evil looks. Without a distinguished past, Julia had no choice. She simply hoped this choice would protect her family and Robelia. Julia set a condition. The entire inheritance must go to Robelia. But soon after the wedding, Malone revealed his true nature. Julia Ephalentia renounced her right to inherit all family assets. Malone said there was one omission. If Robelia was his brother's child, then her status would be superior to her brother's. The lady lost her temper, asking Malone how his uncle could think that way about a child who had lost his father. Malone turned Robelia into an illegitimate child and appropriated the remaining assets for himself. He persistently tormented Julia and threatened her with death. Julia could not choose such a fate for her daughter, and eventually renounced the Robelian bloodline and fled from Malone's hands. Together, they moved to the village to live a peaceful life, until the age of 13, when Robelia mysteriously developed malaria. Julia held her sick daughter in her arms and begged Malone to save the child, but Robelia's death played into his hands. Malone asked the lady not to forget that he had not killed Julia in these 10 years, purely for the sake of his reputation. Julia was ready to do anything for her daughter, and such a price made Malone doubt. Uncle commissioned the capital's temple to heal Robelia and accepted them as a military family. Malone was rumored to be a generous aristocrat who had taken them in, but they were shamelessly treated as parasites. Josephine blamed Julia and Robelia for her divorce from Malone, and even after their reunion, he does not love her or her daughter. In a fit of rage, Josephine beat Julia. The lady couldn't bear the beating and passed out. Josephine, frightened, immediately called a member of Congress. Julia was ill for 2 months. Robelia stayed by her mother's bedside at night and often fell asleep from exhaustion. Suddenly, Julia woke up and turned to her daughter. The lady asked why their lives had become such a nightmare. All her life, Julia tried and dreamed that their daughter would have a calm and happy life. This was Julia's only dream. After her words, the lady began to cough and spit blood. Robelia took her mother's hand and begged her not to talk anymore, as it would only make things worse. Soon Julia died. Her death was full of regret, and Robelia remained at her bedside and sobbed. Shocked by her mother's death, Robelia lost consciousness, and it was then that the heroine learned about the existence of a collection of secrets of this world. After a wonderful dream, the main character woke up, but her mother was no longer on the bed. Malone entered the room and revealed the truth to Robelia. Because of the crimes she had committed, Julia could not be buried in the family grave, so she was cremated. The main character was burning with rage, not understanding why Malone behaved so impudently, because he took everything that belonged to her. Robelia didn't know what to do. The spirit of her late mother appeared behind her and told her to take revenge. The heroine heard that voice and didn't know whether she imagined it because she was tired or whether it was real. The voice continued speaking, telling Robelia to take revenge so that no one would dare take away her happiness again. In tears, Robelia came to the decision of revenge, so that everything would return to normal and Malone would get what he deserved. When Robelia lost herself for 4 days after her mother's death, she saw great magic in a dream. It was gypsy magic. When the main character lived in the suburbs, she saw her mother use magic to strangle a chicken. Her mother never told her daughter about gypsies or magic, and yet, in her dreams, when Robelia saw magic with her own eyes, the gypsy blood flowing through her veins responded to Robelia. The main character described in the story was Ina, the daughter of Marlon, and also Robelia's cousin, and she was a villain and offended Ina, the child beloved by Marlon and Josephine. Robelia oppressed Ina in every way possible. Worst of all, she used her blood to curse her. Ina, tormented by gypsy magic, meets the protagonist, and together they defeat the villain. Afterwards, they inherited Marlon's wealth and lived happily ever after. Robelia played the role of the villain in the story because everything was written from Ina's perspective. Robelia's mother never told her about Marlon's dirty plans, nor that Robelia was a biological descendant of the Ephalentia family. If the main character hadn't learned the truth, she would have taken revenge on Ina, just like in the original story. But now Robelia understood that the only target of her revenge was Marlon. To get revenge on him, the main character must first prove that she has Ephalentian blood. But Marlon burned her birth certificate and registration papers. The only thing even her uncle didn't know was her baptismal certificate. Even if Robelia were to prove she was of Ephalentia blood, she would be quickly suppressed, as she lacks any power. Therefore, the protagonist needs strength and someone to be her sword and shield. While reading the papers, the main character had in mind a person suitable for this role. All that was left was to contact him. The main character's memories are transported to a summer 3 years ago. The event took place at a royal fencing tournament. Robelia held an umbrella for Ina, who asked her to come to tournaments with her more often. The nobility discussed Robelia, calling her an illegitimate child born to a gypsy woman. The aristocrat pressed the enemy and fought without any mercy. Jade Parado cut down his opponent. Jade is the sole head of the ducal family in the empire. In the original, this man opposed the protagonist in politics and ideology. The main character wasn't sure she could consider him an ally, but Robelia had already memorized everything from that book. Robelia had to try to recruit Jade because she had nothing left to lose. The main character soon arrived at the palace of the Duke of Parado. Rumors immediately spread in the estate that an illegitimate child had arrived. To meet the Duke, Robelia said she brought a letter from Marlon. When the heroine entered the Duke's room, Jade said he expected to see a letter from Count Ephalentius. Jade's eyes were red as flames, yet cold as ice. That wild atmosphere didn't match his fine manners at all. His look was still the same, just like 15 years ago. Robelia sat down on a chair and immediately admitted she had lied about the letter. Jade wasn't entirely surprised, as Malone wouldn't have trusted his daughter, a servant, with such a matter. Knowing this, Jade let Robelia in, meaning he was going to listen to her. He was quite intrigued. Jade asked why the illegitimate child of the Ephalentia family wanted to see him, so much so that she lied about the reason for her visit and was not afraid of the consequences. Robelia had heard that the Duke of the Parado supported especially gifted young men, so she wanted to be one of them. Jade had heard that the Ephalentia family's bastard was quiet and timid. This was different from the rumors. However, after reading that book and accepting the truth, Robelia couldn't act differently. Jade said that after seeing him fall from the stands during a fencing competition, the Duke doubted the veracity of the rumors. Jade won the championship with great difficulty, but the realization of victory came only after the support of the fans. The man stood up from his chair and said he was ready to see what Robelia had to offer him. Robelia could solve James' main problem. He suggested it was liberation from the royal family or the return of his rightful lands. The main character revealed that the Duke's greatest desire is to be freed from the curse of a foreign state. Jade immediately grabbed his sword and held it to Robelia's throat, asking who told her about this. The Duke's anger subsided when he saw a strange smile on Robelia's face. The girl asked him if he was afraid to fall asleep every night. In the past, following the Emperor's orders, Jade led an attack on other countries, but he was attacked by a madman who controlled a magical beast. Thus, the Duke lost his ego. Ultimately, he suffered a terrible curse that rendered him non-human. He often controlled his emotions. Robelia heard that when Jade grabbed his sword, he would fly into a rage. The main character took a step forward and convinced the Duke that she was able to lift the curse. Robelia has found an elixir that improves sleep. It's only a temporary solution, but it won't completely solve the problem. After trying the elixir, Jade would begin to trust Robelia. The Duke wanted to clarify what kind of support the girl needed. Robelia wanted to start a business, one that would provide her with a stable income and one day be able to bring Ephalentia's family back. The main character bowed and said that when Jade was convinced of the truth of her words, he should contact her. First, Robelia gave the elixir to Jade. Now she just needs to wait for him to contact her when Jade will understand its effectiveness. Malone appeared behind Robelia and asked the girl where she had been for so long. After all, the main character had left again without his permission. Robelia turned around and admitted that she had gone to church to pray. Malone replied that Yulia's remains had been cremated in the church. Whenever Robelia missed her, the only thing she could do was go to church. If something happened there, Malone might not know about it. Therefore, the man asked Robelia not to go there so often. After the conversation, the main character rushed to her room. She suddenly wanted to do something with Malone. The girl wanted to kill him, but her uncle didn't deserve an easy death. She had to make him pay. Early in the morning, a maid knocked on Robelia's door. The girl asked what she wanted, and the maid asked her to go into the main room. Lady Aina wanted to see Robelia. When the girl came to her, Aina revealed that she already knew about her visit to the church, asking if it was because of Julia's death, which was weighing on Robelia. Aina asked the heroine to tidy herself up and stand next to her. Robelia didn't understand the meaning of this request, but the maid interrupted Aina and said that she had to leave, because during the last royal meeting, Aina had dropped her handkerchief. Noblewomen often throw handkerchiefs in front of anyone who catches their eye. The person must return the handkerchief and give a gift to impress the interested party. This was the first time Robelia had seen Aina so happy. Apparently, this was no ordinary nobleman, since Aina had gathered all the servants. Aina immediately greeted the guest, assuming that the guy had arrived from the palace of the Duke of Peridot. Aina thought that the guy came to return her scarf and brought a gift with him. The last time she dropped her handkerchief at the royal banquet, it was a mistake. But the Duke of Peridot actually came to her. The guy apologized and revealed that he came there to meet Miss Robelia Ephalentia. The young gentleman introduced himself as Joachim Germanis, saying that he had come to see Miss Robelia by order of the Lord, the Duke of Peridot. Aina couldn't believe that they had actually come to Robelia, but there was no mistake in the Duke's decision. Joachim said the Duke sent the invitation and gifts directly here. If Miss Robelia doesn't mind, His Highness wanted to invite her today to thank her. Josephine approached Robelia and asked her where she was going without saying a word. Josephine heard everything, and for Robelia to be invited by the Duke is wonderful news. But the woman is very worried. Be that as it may, Robelia had only just recovered. Josephine was worried that if she went out for too long, she would fall into heartache again. The woman told Robelia to stay in the palace, as Aina wanted to talk to her. Josephine wanted to know how the Duke knew about Robelia. Joachim intervened and said that he had seen her in church the previous day. Since Robelia had helped his lordship, Jade wanted to thank her. He also said that Robelia must come at all costs. If Joachim returned empty-handed, the Duke would be very upset. Because of the gift, the Duke left his schedule empty. If I refuse Jade like that, strange rumors will spread. Malone yelled at Josephine not to give others cause for rumors. But the woman replied that after the beating, Yulia suddenly lost consciousness. Malone didn't want to listen to any more excuses. Because Julia would soon die anyway, the main thing was not to make noise. Malone wasn't at the estate today, so Robelia had a hard time asking for permission to leave. If Robelia returns to the estate, Josephine will not hold back, and Malone will also return. Joachim turned to the main character and asked if she was okay. He was afraid that Robelia would be upset by what had happened in the palace. The question of her condition reminded Robelia of old memories of how one of the nobles had taken an interest in her. The guy said that even if Robelia was illegitimate, the parents had crossed the line. The main character told Joachim that this did not apply to him, for which the guy apologized. People are naturally evil and greedy. Because of their greed, they forget about morality and do terrible things. It's best not to trust them until you see through their nature. Robelia wasn't going to accept anything she didn't trust. After all, she wouldn't trust anyone again. Jade asked all the workers to leave and said that he was waiting for Robelia, asking the girl to take her place. Jade laid out a whole feast for the girl. But Robelia asked a counter-question about the effectiveness of the elixir. The Duke replied that since the curse was cast, he had had his first night without nightmares. The protagonist reminded her that this was only a temporary solution. To completely dispel it, Robelia must enter the Duke's dreams. Jade believed there was no need for treatment at this point. Robelia was the first to break the curse. Jade agreed to run the business, but he didn't think it was a good idea. To find the Ephalentia family, the business needed to be large-scale. Even if Robelia hides her identity, when her business grows, the girl will have to appear. And then, the heroine will be a target for many nobles, and that includes the current Count of Ephalentia. But Robelia was preparing for this, which is why she was considering a sponsorship system. Jade interrupted Robelia and said that he knew a more effective way to grow the business. Malone was shocked that Robelia was invited by the Duke, and Josephine let her go. Uncle was confused as to why the Duke would need Robelia at all. Before her death, Julia told Robelia about her powers. But Malone did not know this and wanted to find out about it with all his might. The maid visited the Count and reported that Robelia had returned. Malone ordered Robelia to go immediately to the reading room. As it turned out, Robelia was not alone. The girl came with the Duke of Paradado. Malone appeared and told the Duke that it was an honor for him to meet such an important person. He also apologized for not greeting Jade properly. Uncle stood behind Robelia and said that he knew about Robelia's invitation to his mansion. But that was not the reason for the Duke's arrival. Mr. Parado revealed that his real goal was to take Lady Robelia to his estate. Malone said he couldn't grant such a request, no matter who the person asking was. He also wanted to know why Duke Parado wanted to take Robelia. Jade stood up and kissed Robelia's palm, saying that when he first saw her in the church, the Duke fell in love with her at first sight. When the main character was at the Duke's estate, they agreed to be consensual lovers, with the story of how they accidentally met in a church. Robelia didn't think Malone would fall for such a lie, but given the Duke's bad reputation with girls, it was possible. At first, Robelia had the same idea. Instead of breaking the curse, they signed a 3-year contract. But now she's just a commoner, not a noblewoman. A shameful bastard, known to all. Nobles typically value their blood. Therefore, they should have no desire to harm her. Ultimately, Robelia agreed to become lovers. Jade wanted to take Robelia away to spend more time with her. Malone apologized and said he couldn't let the girl leave because of the rumors about the Duke. Rumor has it that the Duke is always followed by a horde of girls, and he changes them like gloves. He's a real ladies' man, and the ladies flock to him. Robelia already knew the real reason. Jade did it on purpose to avoid marriage. Malone said he was still worried. Even if he and Robelia weren't related by blood, she was still his brother's beloved daughter. Therefore, his uncle had a duty to take care of this child. Malone was sure the Duke would still insist after this. So, when Jade left, Uncle wanted to lock Robelia in a separate mansion. Jade offered to support Robelia. The Duke's domains provide support for the especially gifted. He could include Miss Robelia on this list and write a letter of recommendation so that Robelia could study at the academy. If, in his own words, Malone wanted to support Robelia, he had no choice, and the deadlock angered his uncle. He would never let Robelia go for love, so the Duke provoked Malone and announced his support. Malone is concerned about whether Robelia knows the truth or not, and what will completely eradicate this mistrust. The protagonist took extreme measures and told her uncle that she will stay in Ephalentia. The Duke was surprised, as this hadn't been planned. Robelia insisted that when Julia and she were left homeless, Malone had taken care of them. Bowing down, Robelia said that if Malone did not allow it, then she would stop interacting with the Duke of Paradado. Thanks to this provocation, Robelia managed to leave with the Duke. Jade asked the girl to warn him about such drastic decisions next time. The Duke said that after the question with the Count, we need to move on to entering the academy. As a rule, students do not often go outside the dormitory, but if there is a reason, then you can stay away until you feel like it. The main character didn't worry about the remaining luggage in the estate, as she took her mother's favorite pendant with her. Jade decided to move on to the business topic, saying that growing a business requires considerable investment. The Duke could help at the initial stage, but he wouldn't spend his treasury forever. The Ephalentia family's business rests on 4 pillars. The first is gold and diamonds mined in the family mines. The second was transportation through the industrial heart of the empire. The third was rental income from family estates, and the fourth was stock exchange trading. Jade was surprised by Robelia's strong intentions. The girl added that she already had an investor in mind. To my great surprise, the main character was going to accept Her Majesty the Queen as her investor. If the Queen's support option is pursued, Robelia will be able to gain almost unlimited financial support and influence. However, achieving this is not easy. Jade didn't know the main character's plan, but the confidence in her eyes was hard to miss. The Duke also asked Robelia for a favor. If she agreed, she could count on his loyalty. Due to the constant power of Uncle Malone, the main character was not going to even listen to the Duke's proposals. Because Robelia did not trust the nobility, the Duke immediately got to the point and asked Robelia not to betray him, because betraying the heroine would result in death. Although there was no trust between them, Robelia was glad that the Duke had clear goals that he wanted to achieve. Soon the carriage arrived at the Duke's estate. Joachim got down on one knee and immediately asked Milady for her hand in order to help her get off the carriage. The main character found this act strange, since kneeling on one knee is a custom only for knights. Jade asked Robelia for permission to help her, pretending that he was incredibly happy to be with her. From now on, they have to pretend to be lovers, so the main character will also have to get into character. Before entering the estate, a man introduced himself as Gerald. He was the butler of this estate. The Duke watched the joyful expression on Robelia's face and was surprised that she could be like that. The maids continued cleaning and discussed the expression on Duke Jade's face. He was so happy. The main character entered the room right at the peak of the discussion. One of the maids got scared and accidentally broke a cup. Robelia asked the maids for help because she was going to dine with the Duke. While the girl's hair was being combed, Robelia noticed the maids discussing these situations. The main character had no intention of being a good girl in front of them. Noticing how the maid was picking up the pieces, Robelia could not stand her pitiful appearance and asked the girls to leave her alone. Before the maids left, the main character said that they could shift the blame for the broken cup onto her. Soon Aina also learned from Malone that from now on, Robelia would live at the academy. The Count's daughter was broken. Her uncle ordered the girl not to raise this topic again, because everything had already been decided. In a fit of emotion, Aina took the bottle and repeated to herself the question of why Robelia suddenly left for the academy, since this happened right after the meeting with the Duke of Parato. As sunset approached, the couple finished their light dinner and the estate settled into a quiet evening. Jade took a shower and told Mr. Gerald that Lady Robelia would be staying in his room tonight. The maids were shocked. The Duke had never given such orders before, but Gerald asked to stop this mess immediately. The main character got ready for bed and changed into her night clothes, apologizing to the Duke for the wait. During lunch, Jade suggested to Lady Robelia that he begin his treatment from today. The main character expected such a solution because Jade had been suffering from a curse for a long time, and a solution was finally found. Robelia confirmed that she needed to get into the Duke's dreams, and in order for everything not to look suspicious to others, the couple would need to spend the night together. Jade wanted to know if the scented candles were necessary. They weren't really necessary, but considering they would help the Duke fall asleep faster, Robelia was planning to use them. Judging by the Duke's look, he still didn't believe Robelia, but the girl insisted on using magic. The main character said she was starting. Once the Duke fell asleep, the girl would follow him, thus allowing her to enter his dream. Suddenly, Robelia took Jade's hand. Physical contact was needed to enter the dream. The main character started drawing on the Duke's fingers because she needed to draw a spell. Initially, it was supposed to be Aina, not Robelia, who would lift the curse. Aina learned of his curse by accident, as did the solution. Being an innocent and beautiful heroine, she cleansed Jade's heart. However, the delayed treatment led to the curse spiraling out of control. As a result, the Duke died. His death was likely Aina's fault. Since Jade Parato was a villain, his existence threatened her happy life. Soon the effect took effect, and the main character found herself in the Duke's dream. Robelia didn't think she'd start her dream journey in the kitchen, but it would make it easier to get to Jade. The main character stopped the maid and decided to help, as she was heading to the Duke's room. These days, the maid was afraid to approach the master. This had not happened for 4 years. The main character went to the Duke's room. The key moment took place in a dream, at 1440. Robelia needs to find and destroy the traces of the curse in his mind. It's hidden deep within Jade's memories. The girl was setting food on the table. She needed a reason to come back again. The Duke asked Robelia if she was the new maid. Robelia didn't expect that the Duke would remember the faces of all his maids, even in his dreams. Mr. Pareto asked the heroine to put away the books. The head maid will bring him food and clean up, so Jade will be there. The main character considered this a great chance to wait for the turning point. Suddenly, the moment arrived. Joachim and his subject came to the Duke and began discussing information about the road's construction. Soon the time came for the curse to appear, and the Duke's hand began to shake, frightening his subjects. Clenching his fist, Jade slammed his hand on the table and ordered everyone to leave his room. From that moment on, no one dared to show their face to him. Robelia hid behind the sofa. It seemed her subjects had gotten used to the curse, as 4 years had already passed. The Duke took up the blade. Lord Parato's curse mark was located right on the back of his neck. Even though this sword is a fake, in Jade's hands, even such a weapon becomes dangerous. Robelia didn't know what to do if she wanted to get rid of the mark on her neck. First, she had to get closer. As soon as the heroine tried to crawl, the Duke noticed her and asked if she hadn't heard the order to immediately leave this room. The Duke was consumed by the desire to shed blood, swinging his sword at the main character. In terrible agony, the Duke took hold of her wrist with his other hand and asked Robelia to leave immediately if she did not want to get hurt. Robelia tried to convince Jade that everything was fine. Since his rise to Duke, no one knew about the curse. The Duke had suffered terrible pain for 4 years. The heroine didn't think she would be hurt by the sword, but Jade had already heard these words. Robelia was no different from the others. Robelia stepped closer, asking the Duke just once for Jade to trust her. Duke Parato was scared. His expression made it clear that Jade was afraid of hurting someone. With one deft movement, the main character touched the mark on her neck, causing it to flare up. Jade fell to the ground. Robelia approached him and repeated that everything was fine. The Duke wanted to know what had happened when he lost consciousness. Robelia revealed that they were in a dream. The heroine had just gotten rid of the traces of the curse that had been appearing in her dreams. The couple was still asleep. Robelia added that they still needed to help the Duke wake up. Jade said that he trusted Robelia because she was the only one whose hand reached his. Jade admitted that Robelia's pretense of being a maid was quite believable. The main character extended her hand and told the Duke that it was time to return to reality. The Duke was embarrassed, but Robelia convinced him that it was necessary, and without following the plan, it would be impossible to get out of the dream. Robelia said that a little later, everything she experienced in this dream would repeat itself. The Duke hoped that next time he would be able to recognize her from the start, but this was highly unlikely. The girl asked Jade to relax and imagine he was lying on the surface of the water. Suddenly, the surroundings changed. The Duke asked about the girl in the snow. These were Robelia's memories, but she asked him to ignore them. It was difficult for Jade to remain indifferent to the child's suffering, but the main character again asked her to ignore him, as making a mistake now would ruin the progress made in the healing process. Soon the Duke woke up. Mr. Parato began to feel better. His body felt light as a feather. There was no point in continuing the treatment yet, as Robelia had destroyed the mark in this dream, leaving a void there. It was necessary to wait until this void was filled. Lady Robelia's gaze was blank, probably just a side effect from the first time. The main character was about to leave, but the Duke stopped her. He said that, as planned, he was going to visit the academy and decide on his admission. Duke Parato was worried about the main character. Robelia asked him not to worry, as rest was more important to Jada right now. The maids were already discussing last night, surprised that the Duke had actually fallen in love. There was a knock on Mrs. Robelia's door. She allowed entry, but she looked too tired. The maids immediately apologized and decided to tidy up Lady Robelia, as she shouldn't appear before the Duke in such a state. But even after the makeup, Robelia's appearance did not improve, but on the contrary, became even gloomier. The maids wanted to fix her makeup, but the main character insisted that she was about to leave, so she shouldn't keep the Duke waiting. Robelia didn't expect to look so pale. Apparently, entering other people's dreams using magic takes more energy than expected. Joachim noticed Lady Robelia and was shocked, immediately asking Milady what happened last night. Joachim assumed that the maids were treating Milady badly, but Robelia convinced him that everything was fine. In fact, the maids did not treat Robelia with contempt. They simply did not care about her because they considered her just another of the Duke's girls, whom he would throw out at any moment. On the other hand, Robelia was already feeling better from using magic. Now it was time to head to the dining hall, as the Duke was already waiting for the main character. Joachim asked the main character to contact him if something happened. Robelia asked a counter-question. Why was Joachim so pushy? She was not a lady who needed his protection. The boy replied that a knight should come to the aid of anyone who needs it. The main character replied that she didn't need help and wouldn't ask for it. After all, as soon as someone starts helping her, Robelia immediately gets used to that help and relies heavily on that person. Even if all of Joachim's kindness was genuine, it would only hinder her revenge. The protagonist didn't want to let herself be betrayed again. The Duke also noticed Robelia's meager appearance. She'd already been told about it 3 times today. The thing was that Robelia couldn't sleep while she was in someone else's dream. That's why she was so tired. Jade revealed that Robelia would be residing in the Academy's eastern building. The Academy is divided into 3 buildings: Eastern, Western, and Northern. The main character was delighted, because Aelin Regretina's half-brother was also in the Eastern Corps. Aelin Regretina is a minor character who hangs around with Aina. He is the second son of Earl, the owner of the famous Regretina store. Unlike the main character, Aelin is a very calculating person who is hungry for money. Ephalentia, considering his necessity for the implementation of her plan, getting into the Eastern course is just in time. When the main character finished lunch, she and the Duke went to the Academy. Robelia was surprised, all because she had already seen the Duke's estate several times, but the girl was seeing the Academy for the first time. Duke, Jade, and Robelia went to the registration. Mr. Parado handed over all the necessary documents. The woman examined the documents and said that, in addition to everything else, there was no permission to spend the night outside the Academy. But that was the plan. Robelia thought she'd meet her half-brother Aelin here, but now she's not sure she'll even stay the night. The Duke told the main character that she would be at the Academy for no more than 2 days, so there was no point in wasting time. The couple walked hand in hand, and the Duke added that there was a restroom at the end of the corridor, so it wouldn't hurt to be careful. Getting down to business, the Duke asked if the main character wanted to represent the Empress's palace. Robelia agreed. The Duke remarked that this was an excellent development opportunity. Word had just gotten out about an available position, but the competition would be tough. Palace representative is a position that allows one to manage the royal family's assets, investments, profits, and the distribution of all expenses. This position was invented by aristocratic families who do not delve into finances. The kingdom is doing a great job of investing, but its representatives must be outstanding. They are chosen regardless of position or background. Robelia noted that Her Majesty hails from the family of Marquis Melix, which is on par with the Ephalentia family. If the protagonist becomes a representative of the Empress's palace, she will receive a good fortune to begin with. The Duke heard that Count Ephalentia also wants to get this position from Her Majesty. As the Duke had said, in the original story, Aina received this position. Although she was inexperienced in investing, Malone used bribes to make her a representative. He donated all the money to the Empress's events. Malone had nothing to lose, because he could get more by manipulating Aina. In return, the Empress received something, and Aina was appointed as the palace representative. The main character said that Malone should not be taken into account because he did not know what Her Majesty wanted. In fact, the Empress had been searching for the blue diamond for a long time. Robelia knew this because of the history book. The Duke did not understand why Her Majesty needed a diamond, since the Queen already had a lot of jewelry. The Empress has a secret that only a few people know. When she was young, she couldn't stand the strictness of the other empresses and made a mistake after a debutante ball. Having become addicted to gambling, the Queen placed bets that she was unable to pay off, so she used her mother's blue diamond to pay off her debts. It was only after her mother's death that the Empress began to regret it. However, the Queen was unable to find him, fearing that her shameful past would be exposed. This diamond is the Empress's weakness. She will notice such a gift. Furthermore, the representatives must deliver the items the imperial family desires. If Robelia returns the diamond, her attention will immediately turn to the main character. The Duke wondered where to find such a treasure. The heroine already knew where to buy it. Mr. Parado was surprised by this information asking how Robelia could know such a thing. With a smirk, the main character replied that this was a gift from heaven for her to pay back her enemies. Jade needn't have worried about the price. The owner wanted to get rid of the diamond. The owner was the Regritina family's second son, Ilan Regritina. As Duke Parado already knew, Ilan Regritina was not one to sell things cheaply. To get closer to him, he needs to befriend his half-brother, so Robelia will have a better chance of meeting Ilan. The Duke noted that Ilan would be visiting the Sergei Opera House tomorrow, a public venue where everyone gets to know each other before and after performances. Ilan never missed such events, so he had to show up. Robelia figured it would be much easier than she thought. The main character asked the Duke of Parado for help so that they could go on a date. When the maids learned about the opera, they immediately rushed to help the main character with the preparations. Robelia looked around the room, wondering where all the jewelry and dresses around her came from, assuming that Jade Parado's lovers were here. When the main character's look was put together, Robelia liked the dress because it suited her. Robelia wanted to know where this dress came from. The maids replied that it was a gift from the Duke for Milady. The maids called Robelia's costume beautiful. The main character had heard that her appearance seduced men. Duke Parado was already waiting for the main character downstairs, asking her why Milady was late. The main character apologized for the delay and suggested that the Duke leave immediately. Jade couldn't take his eyes off the heroine, not showing that he admired Robelia. On the way to the opera house, Robelia explained what Ilan had done with the blue diamond. Ilan was indeed a merchant. Robelia wanted to find an approach to him because convincing him shouldn't be a difficult task. The Duke remarked that Ilan, while popular, wasn't a very good person. It was best not to talk to him at length and get straight to the point. Soon the couple arrived at the opera house. Inside there were many nobles, and each of them was dressed as lavishly as possible. When Jade arrived at the opera, all eyes were on him, and the atmosphere around him was beautiful. The girls also noticed Robelia Ephalentia. They thought men would definitely be enchanted by her, but rumor had it that she was the daughter of a gypsy. Ina was not delighted to see that her once maid was dressed like a noble girl. Ina also didn't understand why Robelia was there, since Malone had insisted she would go to the academy, and now Robelia did whatever she wanted. This made the girl think she had been too kind to the maid. The girl forced the main character to hold the notes and ordered her not to cover the paper with her fingers. Ina stood up for Robelia, saying that her little sister couldn't read music, so it was worth forgiving her. Mr. Ephalentius's attitude toward the illegitimate child is astounding. Ina was too kind, after all. It's not easy for a gypsy's daughter to get into a concert. Ina considered the main character her doll, so she had no right to treat her like that. Miss Robelia noticed Aina, who immediately turned around at the sight of her sister. Ilan Regritina was the first to address Aina, noticing the girl's tired appearance, and at the same time offering her a drink. Miss Robelia approached Ilan and spoke to Mr. Regritino right in front of Aina. In the original story, Ilan Regritina spoke respectfully to the main character. Moreover, he offered Robelia a plot of land to take over Ephalentia's property. Ilan seemed friendly, but that's just his habit. Ilan hadn't seen Robelia with Aina for a long time, not understanding what could have happened between them. Aina turned to her sister and asked if Robelia had gone to the academy. Aina added that all her friends are here, and the main character is her servant. She shouldn't be here. Robelia needed connections for business, so she didn't pay attention to her sister's nonsense. The main character noted that they first saw each other after she left the house, asking Lady Aina how she was. If Robelia left the mansion, she shouldn't have contacted Aina. But right in front of the nobles, she spoke with her sister. Duke Parado turned to Robelia and invited them to take their seats. Aina continued to watch this. Suddenly, the girl cried out that she had lent Robelia to the Duke of Parado because he said he needed a servant. The main character didn't understand what was happening, but it was still necessary to clarify the situation. Jade Parado was the first to intervene and asked Miss Aina what she meant by the maid. To Aina's further surprise, the Duke announced that he had formally requested Malone's permission to date Robelia. The Viscount said that Robelia was illegitimate, that she had been raised in secret, and no matter how much the Duke loved Robelia, how could he meet with her? Monsieur Parado turned around and asked the Viscount to watch his language. The Duke didn't care what people said about him, but Robelia's honor would no longer be damaged here. Almost everyone who has been involved in gossip knows that Jade Peridot has never truly loved anyone. He avoided family pressure to marry. If a noble lady had confessed her feelings to the Duke, part of him would have accepted it, but he never crossed the line. Even all his gifts to his mistresses were for show, not from the heart. When escorting them to events, the Duke was polite, but not at all emotional. Girls dreaming of true love abandoned him. Now with Robelia, Mr. Peridot behaves differently. This has alarmed the nobility. Ina simply needs to say that Robelia is unsuitable as the Duke's girlfriend. She's doing this for the good of the Duke of Peridot's house. If Ina says this, he'll forgive her. In any case, the main character could have made the best of the situation by telling Ina that everything was okay. Robelia said that, to tell the truth, she had many shortcomings, and Lady Ania was worried about this. Hugging the Duke, the main character thanked Ina for her concern, but everything was fine between them and Mr. Peridot. The main character thanked the Duke for his help earlier. Jade responded that they had insulted his love, so he took it personally. The Duke was under no obligation to do so. After all, the terms of the contract simply included the fact that she was his lover. Lady Robelia added that she would deal with Ilan Regritina during the break. While listening to the theater performance, Robelia revealed that the Ephalentia family owns this theater. The Duke knew about this. The former count had transformed this place into a beautiful piece of land for the capital. Everyone knew he was in charge of the rental business. Thanks to this, the Ephalentia family grew stronger. The former count is James Ephalentia. Robelia wanted to take back everything her father created. Following James' question, the main character confirmed that they would get this theater. And the first step, Robelia must get to Island Regritin for the diamond. If Robelia doesn't get used to aristocratic society, she will only be able to return to her house. Everyone can see how worried she is about the maid. Ina was supported by many people. Robelia also knew that she was worried about her. Therefore, the main character should easily forgive Ina. Soon, Duke Peridot and Robelia entered the break room where Ina was thinking about her plan. The couple attracted many glances. The daughter of a lowly gypsy next to a duke, second in power only to the emperor himself, seemed an odd pairing. Now that everyone is watching, the main character needs to get some work done. Everything for the future of business. Ina asked her sister to come a little later, as she was talking with Elin. But Robelia ignored Ina and addressed Mr. Regritin directly. The noble girls were not against Robelia's company. Now she is no longer Ina's servant, and when she sits down, there will be a chance to talk to the Duke. The Duke was pleased that their plan had worked. The main character wasn't being treated like a servant. That was already an achievement. Ina continued her conversation with Elin, asking if he wanted to put new gems in the shop, as she had heard that there would be a lot of his jewelry at the auction that would be held that evening. Elin replied that there would be plenty of jewelry this time. Ina would definitely like the ruby necklace that Queen Revan herself wore at her coronation. Ina tried to eliminate Robelia from the dialogue, because this is a conversation between nobles, so she has no place here. The main character doesn't care whether Elin flirts with her or proposes. The main thing is to get the blue diamond. Robelia asked Elin if he had ever bought diamonds that amazed people with their beauty. The main character wanted to find something special, something unlike any other. Robelia is willing to buy it at any price. Mr. Island would simply ignore the bastard, but the Duke keeps an eye on her. A blue diamond for Jade Peridot. Island believed that the girl wanted to give it to her lover. Elin told Miss Robelia that he was sorry, but he couldn't help with that. Unfortunately, he didn't have those kinds of jewels on his list. The Duke thought the plan was about to fail, but Robelia asked him not to worry, because it was part of her plan. The bait has already been thrown. It will take a little time for Elin to return to the girl's interesting offer. The main character told the Duke that she needed some fresh air, after which she went outside, and Elin noticed this. Elin followed Robelia, saying it was all about the beautiful blue stone, and that it was the one the main character wanted. The blue stone was cursed by God. Robelia replied that Elin, although a merchant, was more honest than anyone thought, because he revealed the truth. Elin wanted to explain more about the curse, but Robelia interrupted him and said that she already knew everything. The main character said that it is a blue diamond in the shape of a teardrop. There are rumors that it brings misfortune to its owner. Elin saw this gem at the concierge auction. He probably thought the curse was just a rumor. But after purchasing it, misfortunes began to happen. from the small to the great. A huge carriage went off the road, and an entire family became victims. The main character added that this is not a guess. She is sure that the diamond curse is real. Whenever great sorrow strikes, Island will try to get rid of it. No matter how hard he tries, it will always return. The owner can only exchange it. Selling the gem isn't an option, as Island acquired it at an illegal auction. If everyone finds out about the cursed stone, it will be the end. Aelin tried to hide his existence from everyone, and so he was now talking secretly with Robelia. The main character offered to help Aelin. To avoid losing the money he spent, Robelia could ensure that the profits would increase 15-fold. Aelin wanted to sell this diamond at any cost, because he realized that all this was because of the cursed stone, so he turned to Count Regretin. The diamond had been cursed ever since it was first auctioned. The Count couldn't believe his son was so ignorant that even at that age, he didn't know the basics of business. The Count said that if his son couldn't put it up for sale officially, Aelin would find another way, since he was the heir of the Regretina family. Even as a child, Aelin possessed a keen intuition. Despite his young age, he knew who to approach at social gatherings, and as he matured, Aelin understood how to maximize the benefits of these connections. In all this time, Aelin's instinct had never failed him, so he was even more convinced that he had to throw away the diamond. His father warned him, banking on Aelin's position as heir, but he must get rid of the stone. If Aelin kept this diamond, he too could fall victim to the curse. He thought it was all over, until Aelin returned to his office and saw the diamond sitting in its place, as if nothing had happened. After that, Aelin threw it out a few more times, but it always came back. For the first time in his business, he suffered losses and encountered minor problems. Furthermore, Aelin was injured when a wheel fell off his perfectly maintained carriage, and his anxiety about sustaining direct damage grew more and more. Since Aelin couldn't throw away the gem, he planned to somehow hide the truth about the blue diamond and sell it. For some reason unknown to him, Aelin felt awe in front of her and decided to trust her. Aelin knew that her offer was obviously a condition he couldn't refuse, and he had a strong feeling that he shouldn't miss this opportunity. The main character wanted Aelin to receive an invitation to a reception at Countess Dora's salon. It would take place in a week. Aelin was surprised, because even a duke could easily have gotten them an invitation. Robelia simply didn't want to be in Aelin's debt. In a contractual relationship, both parties must be equal. The main character returned to the duke and said that she had succeeded, and she promised to buy the diamond. Jade said the more he looked at Robelia, the stranger she seemed to him. Jade assumed there was no curse at all, but Robelia convinced him that there was one. Long ago, a woman from the family of Marquis Milix, from which the Empress came, asked a foreigner to cast a spell on a diamond. In the hands of women of the Milix family, it's a simple good luck charm. But once someone else possesses it, it becomes a monstrous object that brings death. Since the stone was passed down only within the Milix family, its curse wasn't widely known. However, Jade had heard that spells cast on objects lost their power over time. Robelia replied that its effectiveness had diminished, so the train had merely derailed. If the effect had remained the same, anyone who touched the gem would already be dead. Now all the couple had to do was return the jewel. The next step was to gain access to the Empress. Jade offered his help. The main character replied that she didn't need the Duke's help with that. It wasn't in the terms of the contract. The maid brought the cake. Jade ordered dessert for Robelia, as she left hungry. Every time they dined together at the mansion, Jade thought they had no appetite because Robelia didn't touch her food, but it turned out she loved sweets. The main character was surprised, because no one had noticed this before. Such kindness was unfamiliar to her. However, Robelia has more important things to do. She mustn't give in to these feelings and ruin her plan for revenge. The main character said that Jade didn't have to be so kind, but she thanked the Duke for the cake. Having completed the plan to obtain the gem, Robelia suggested continuing to enjoy the rest of the show. Returning to the mansion, Robelia received an invitation to a reception in Countess Dora's salon. When Robelia lost her mother, Malone brought her to the mansion and told Aina that she would now live with them. Aina thought they would become friends, but Malone said he was the illegitimate offspring of a dirty gypsy. So there's no point in considering Robelia your sister, because in the future, Aina will become the Empress of this country. Malone will do everything for her daughter, But for this, Ina needs to learn to manage people of lower status, hinting at Robelia. From an early age, Ina was at the center of the social world. The Ephalentia family is the most influential and wealthy ducal family after the imperial family. Therefore, most noble families took an interest in her. But for Ina, it was merely a pastime. Jade Parado would have been a fun ride too, if not for Robelia's intervention. Everyone liked Ina, and it was natural that she tried to forgive her for Robelia abandoning her and behaving arbitrarily. Ina was furious that Robelia had dared to ignore her in front of the other nobles, making her look like a laughingstock right in front of everyone. The girl was not going to forgive Robelia for embarrassing her in front of all her friends. The main character arrived at Countess Dora's estate. Sir Joachim accompanied the girl. In front of the estate, the carriage of the Ephalentia family is nowhere to be seen. Ina really did not come to this event. Robelia learned of this from a maid who received word from a maid at the Ephalentia estate that Lady Ina would not be attending the reception. Upon hearing that Robelia would be attending, Ina threw away the invitation in anger. The main character didn't understand why Ina was so capricious, assuming that she had decided to leave her alone. Joachim escorted Milady to the estate and said he would be waiting for her in the carriage. His nervousness seemed natural. His eyes radiated only kindness. Joachim stayed here in case Robelia was uncomfortable, despite the fact that she was always cold towards him. When the illegitimate daughter of the Ephalentia family came in, the nobility did not understand how she managed to get an invitation. The theme of this salon is music and poetry. Today, Robelia was going to address a young man with dark brown curly hair and coal-black eyes. Helen Dora, wife of Count Dora, addressed everyone present and thanked them for coming. The theme of today's reception, organized by her, is music and poetry, after which Milady Dora hesitated and fell silent in excitement. Helen Dora is a maid close to the Empress. Most of the Empress's maids also wield considerable influence in the social world, but Dora is incapable of managing events and is quite unpopular due to her weak character. Helen Dora is the easiest way to get close to the Empress. She also has an older sister, Florine. Florine's older sister came out and noticed that her younger sister was still nervous in front of the public. Florine remarked that Dora made her feel like she had to help her today. Florine turned to the audience and said that Helen was still not used to having social events, no matter how old she was. The main character understood Dora's anxiety, because appearing face-to-face in front of all the nobility must have made the Countess very nervous. Helen and Countess Dora dated with the intention of marriage. After 5 years of dating, Helen received a marriage proposal, which she happily accepted and began planning for the wedding. The problem was that Florine was still an unmarried lady at the time. In aristocratic society, it was considered shameful to marry later than one's younger sister. Because of this, many rumors were spread about Florine, and comparisons to Helen were made at every reception she attended. Since then, Florine attends all of Helen's parties to make fun of her and take revenge for the humiliation she suffered. Almost 10 years have passed, so now their relationship can be considered irreparable. Countess Dora went out onto the balcony, and the main character decided to keep her company, offering the woman help. Dora was surprised because she hadn't sent an invitation to Robelia, but she didn't care anymore. The reception is already ruined, so there's no point in bothering. Besides, the main character wasn't here for that. The Countess again closed her eyes to what was happening. In her place, Robelia wouldn't have listened to a powerless, illegitimate child either. But if everything went according to plan, the Countess had to listen to her. Robelia continued to convince Dora that things could still be fixed. The protagonist wanted to free Helen from Lady Florine's clutches. 10 years ago, her husband, Count Dora, once said that Robelia was the legitimate child of the Ephalentia family. When James was still alive, he often saw Robelia. She was the spitting image of her father, with the same bright personality. However, after Julia and Malone's remarriage, she was treated as a bastard. Perhaps her surname was stolen, and, as a commoner, she was listed in the family register only as Robelia. The Count regretted the way his friend James's daughter had been treated, but he had no right to interfere in the affairs of other families. Dora partially believed her husband's words, believing Robelia had been treated unfairly. Milady turned to the main character and decided to cooperate with her after listening to her plan. Robelia found it all to be simpler than she'd imagined. Even if she'd refused to listen, Robelia would have simply made one public statement. Now all that remains is to regain control of the salon. Florine has already spotted Lady Robelia at this evening's event. Florine spoke to the main character, saying that the last time they saw each other was at the opera theater. Robelia replied that she had a bad memory. But Florine didn't pay any attention to this, as the lady was busy with something else at the time. Florine said that the main character was trying to seduce Milord Elin, although Duke Parado was right in front of her. The man mockingly said that after attending several parties as Lady Ana's maid, she wanted a luxurious life. Robelia didn't react at all. She considered it an absurd story, in order to ridicule her and add spice to the evening. The main character is ready to endure any humiliation for the sake of her revenge, because that is the only purpose in her life. But if Robelia ignores this kind of ridicule now, then later, when the protagonist is proven to be the rightful heir of the Ephalentia family, and once again appears before the secular world to exile Malone, they will only mock her again. Robelia had to reconsider the plan she had told the Countess. She had said she would tell Florina a most interesting story. Turning to Viscountess Dream, Robelia said that for such patience with her husband's love affairs, she would be interested to know about Baron Risto and Lady Claire. The last time the main character saw them, they were kissing near the academy. Immediately after these words, rumors began to spread throughout the hall. The Viscountess recalled the last time Lady Claire had come to her house to return a fountain pen that Baron Risto had lent her. Having punched the Baron in the face, Dream was furious that the Baron had started an affair with a young girl behind her back. Seeing this discord, Florine clutched her fan in anger because Robelia dared to ruin her party. Florine asked the protagonist what she was doing. But Robelia also had a story about Lady Florine's affair. The woman couldn't believe her illegitimate offspring was trying to make a move on her. Robelia should have stopped talking about dating. Thanks to Florine's success in the gemstone industry, she had established a solid position in the upper class. Florine was sure no one would believe her. But the main character whispered to the woman that some of the jewelry Florine was selling was inlaid with fake stones. She even bought the necklace Florine is currently wearing on credit because she wanted to impress. But since she didn't have the money to repay the debt, the woman made exact copies of the jewelry and sold them for profit. Repeating the same thing all year long to continue living in luxury, Robelia added that if Florine dared to do it again, she could be caught cheating. Even though the jeweler is still here, Florine has committed crimes against the nobles. Florine knew that if this became known now, she would never be able to appear in the social world again. On top of that, she could be sentenced to prison for fraud. Florine had to somehow conceal the fact that she was selling counterfeit jewelry. The woman told Robelia that she had made a mistake earlier. The main character said that this wasn't what she wanted. Florine knelt down and asked what she should do. The Duke soon learned that Lady Robelia had gone to a social salon with Joachim. He wondered why the main character hadn't asked him to accompany her. Robelia didn't expect Lady Florina to kneel. Everything happened much faster than the heroine expected. The main character asked Florina to promise that this would not happen again in the future. Under pressure, Florina was forced to apologize for her rude remarks and admit that she was very sorry. Florina hoped that she would be able to pay back for this shame as soon as she got rid of the evidence. Robelia began to whisper again, advising the lady to listen to her words in the future. The main character has all the evidence that the jewelry is fake. Florine's secrets can be revealed at any moment. Robelia also ordered Florine not to appear in high society for some time. Robelia lied about having evidence. At least she didn't have to resort to nasty tricks. Countess Dora wasn't the only one surprised by this. The other nobles, fearing for their secrets, also remained silent. Robelia apologized to Helen for the trouble she had caused, asking the Countess to continue the evening. After this, Helen began the second part of the evening, poetry reading. She read a poem called Love Serenade. Robelia addressed the purpose of her visit, asking the poet boy to also perform that evening. The guy said there were no women who would appreciate the poetry of such a poet. Robelia understood that his self-esteem was lower than she had assumed. Even having written such a beautiful poem, Robelia was sure everyone would like his poem. But Wilhelm couldn't understand where the girl got such confidence from. The main character replied that she had already read Wilhelm's poems. The guy was surprised that the lady knew his name. Robelia quoted Wilhelm's verse. Where the green barley rustles, where the wind blows, his heart trembles. The darkness has dissipated, and the light burns his skin. From the inevitability of nature, he succumbed to these heavens and earth. The girl again complimented Wilhelm's poetry. It was a way to convince him, but in reality, it was a sincere compliment to Robelia. While everyone was writing about love, only Wilhelm's poetry carried a deeper meaning. Robelia said that through the field of ripening barley, Wilhelm was broadcasting a message that reward comes after hard work. The Countess didn't understand why everyone was writing about popular sentiments. The butler said he'd sent out invitations to the best poets, and if things continued like this, it would ruin the second part of the reception. Robelia introduced a delightful poet named Wilhelm Meister, asking for the opportunity to perform. Milady Dora doubted that, although he was a great poet according to Robelia, he was very young. The Countess decided to give him the opportunity, since the evening could not get any worse. Helen said it was also a blessing to come here, inviting Wilhelm to speak. A wonderful piano melody echoed the rhyme and the ringing voice of a young man reciting a poem about the ancient Holy Grail. Wilhelm Meister, who initially sang, became known as a brilliant poet 4 years later. When he sang about the Holy Grail, everyone seemed to sense divine energy. And when he sang about the rays of the sun, Robelia actually felt like the sun was shining right before his eyes. The reception in Helen's salon was the stage on which William was born. Milady Dora had never heard such a beautiful and rapturous poem, but no one would have been able to appreciate such talent if Lady Robelia had not introduced it. It would be rude to ignore this fact and simply pretend that Helen knew nothing about it. Therefore, the woman noted that Lady Robelia was a good judge of character and asked to give her a couple of minutes of her time. Countess Dora had never heard such beautiful poetry in her life. It felt as if she were witnessing the birth of a wonderful poet. Because Florine suffered such shame, they will definitely not see her in high society for some time. And it is all thanks to Robelia. Helen wanted to know what she could do for the main character. In high society, nothing is done for free. Robelia knew what she needed and helped. Robelia was surprised, as she couldn't understand how such a harmless woman as Helen Dora could ask such questions so bluntly. It was typical of the upper class, otherwise she wouldn't have lasted long there. Robelia asked the Countess to convey her words to Her Majesty. Helen said that if the request was feasible, she would be able to fulfill it. Although it was troublesome, the request proved feasible. Robelia asked Helen to convey to Her Majesty the words that she considered the tears she had shed long ago beautiful. Helen was a little surprised that Robelia had thought everything through before their conversation. Countess Dora asked for some time to consider her decision, but it was better to pay off the debt as soon as possible. People praised the Countess because they had never seen such a wonderful poet before. Everyone gathered around Helen. There's a certain logic to it. If the nobility wanted to invite a poet who had previously been invited to the salon to a private reception, they would have to get permission from the organizer. Wilhelm thanked Robelia. Thanks to her, he was able to read his poem. The main character replied that it was all because he was talented, because his work was beautiful. If it weren't for Robelia, Wilhelm wouldn't have had the courage to read the poem. No one believed in Wilhelm. Miss Robelia gave him confidence when he first encountered problems. Initially, Wilhelm would have become a famous poet among the elite within 4 years. And without Robelia's help, Wilhelm promised the main character to let her know if Robelia needed help. The next day at the Parado mansion, the Duke asked Robelia why she came alone. The main character said that the Duke had a nightmare and she needed to check on Jade's condition. The Duke said Robelia was literally touching his hand. It was the same last time, but he still wasn't used to it. Robelia was relieved. Everything would heal in 2 days. After her meeting with the Queen, they would begin the second stage of treatment. The Duke couldn't believe his ears. The main character handed over the letter, saying she had received a reply from the Empress. The letter came from an unknown sender. Robelia assumed that Her Majesty wanted a secret meeting. Robelia said that the Rose Palace is the only place to receive strangers. You just need to dress appropriately. The couple could pretend to have met by chance at that palace. Therefore, the Duke asked permission to accompany her this time. 2 days later, the carriage arrived at the Castle of Roses. Duke Parado was very pleased to be Milady Robelia's escort. Jade assumed their meeting with the Empress at Rose Castle might go more smoothly if they pretended to be a couple. And in a few days, everything will return to normal. Even if Malone finds out, they can explain it to him later. The Duke's presence could serve as a pretext for being able to appear before the Empress. Robelia had heard that the castle's trees grow to form a labyrinth, and it's much larger than Milady imagined. People who find themselves there for the first time encounter certain problems. Sometimes they only manage to return after sunset. Therefore, aristocrats prefer to stroll outside the labyrinth. According to the Duke, only members of the royal family can remember the way. So Jade volunteered to accompany her. A guy, Prince Serdic Fontanum, appeared in the labyrinth and said that he was already expecting my lady. Prince Serdic said that they were only here because of Robelia, so she asked my lady to come with him. The main character underestimated the Empress's intelligence. She didn't come for him herself, but sent the crown prince. Robelia told the Duke that she would be leaving, but would return soon. Jade kissed her hand and said that he would be waiting. The prince was surprised that the Duke was so affectionate with Robelia. Rumor had it he'd never opened up to the girl before. When Serdic heard they were dating, he thought of pretending to keep the Duke from asking about marriage. Robelia replied that the Duke was kind to her. The crown prince was pleased to hear this, advising Robelia not to trust the Duke and not to forget her goal. Serdic most likely didn't like the fact that they were heading to the Empress. But the main thing is that thanks to the Duke, they were able to deceive the prince. In the book, Serdic Fontanum was different. When Robelia was Ina's servant, she felt Serdic's contempt for her. But he always showed affection and even gave gifts to win Ina's love. Thanks to this, he was loved, and Robelia at the same time became an illegitimate child and did not know the whole situation, so the nobles amused themselves by mocking her. Soon the main character arrived to the Empress, who greeted her with just a glance. Elena Fontanum said that Helen asked to convey her words, immediately asking Robelia where the diamond was. The head Girana didn't even get a chance to greet her. The Empress immediately wanted to know how to find the blue diamond. Robelia said she heard about an item that belonged to the Regritina family. It was bought at an illegal auction held in the province of Consieri. Elena understood that if she got involved in their affairs, she would definitely not be able to avoid rumors. Besides, there was no one the queen could trust with this matter. Robelia said she would buy the diamond and give it to the queen. The main character's notoriety exists only in high society. No one would be surprised by her deal with the Regritines. The Empress grinned. Robelia had received an invitation to the reception, and she persuaded Helen to pass on her words. Robelia's eyes said she had nothing to lose. They were filled with hatred. Elena understood people like that perfectly well, people who would achieve their goals at any cost. The Empress wanted to know what Robelia wanted. Judging by the protagonist's appearance, she didn't need money. If she had wanted it, she would have already come with that trinket and tried to sell it for several times the price. Or perhaps the Empress wants to accompany her to a high-class banquet. If so, no one will dare offend her. If any other noblemen were here, they would simply demand compensation. However, the imperial family is different. It has acquired a cult following within the state. Robelia admitted that she didn't need anything. She admired Her Majesty with all her heart, so she wanted to be useful. The main character is a simple girl who thanks fate for the opportunity to be near such a great man. The queen stood up and laughed, calling Robelia kind and asking the girl to tell her what she would do. The main character wanted the Empress to be the first to mention the reward. The queen had heard that Elena was alone. It would be a great honor for Robelia to assist Her Majesty in this position. Elena Fontanum saw Robelia's great talent in purchasing things, so she decided to leave this place for her. Malone considered it essential to have a servant like Aina at the palace. This position currently belongs to Robelia. If the heroine receives payment for her expenses from the Empress, she will soon accumulate funds for her business. This is the first step toward restoring the reputation of the Ephalentia family. The queen wanted to know how to maintain communication and where to send her letters. Robelia asked to contact her at the academy. Elena asked her to remember that everything that happened today was a coincidence. They met by fate at the Palace of Roses. The Empress was captivated by her wit, and so she allowed Robelia to take the position. The queen was certain she had no personal stake in what was happening. What would she reward the protagonist for today's work? The Empress didn't give her personal property, but only awarded her with diamonds. Things were going as planned. Robelia could invest in her business without attracting the Empress's attention. Serdic saw Robelia off. asking her not to go to Ephalentia. He knew the main character always felt different around Aina. Anyone in Robelia's place would feel inferior standing next to such a child. This is because Aina is a purebred child, while she is a born misunderstanding. The prince reminded Lady Robelia that she was a nobody, telling her not to even try to get ahead. The heroine left with the Duke after a quarrel with Aina, who cared so much for her, and now Robelia, like a harlot, lived with a man. The prince added that men didn't enhance her value. The main character told the crown prince that she had no quarrel with Lady Aina, which surprised Serdic. Robelia said the prince was wise and prudent, and she was sure he would hear both sides of the story before jumping to conclusions. She had just returned from Ephalentia and had met the Duke on the way. The prince called Robelia a harlot, asking why then the Duke of Parado kept such women in his mansion. The Duke's family is the only one that even the royal family can't look down on. The prince now understood why Aina was so upset. People change from time to time. Just recently, she had been so kind that Serdic could have been mistaken. Finally, His Highness and Robelia returned to the Duke of Parado, who said that the wait had become torture for him. Robelia apologized to the prince for her harsh words, but everything she said was true. Serdic must have thought Lady Aina was always right. Returning to Duke Jade Parado's palace, the main character was already hurrying to the academy. Jade reminded Count Ephalentia that if he had known Robelia was now in the Empress's service, he would have definitely paid her a visit. The main character's luggage was already in the carriage, and the Duke asked Milady's permission to stay next to her. Robelia said that she personally wanted to deal with the Count, so if the Duke is with her, Malone will be even more careful. Jade could imagine what Robelia was thinking. It wasn't that Jade didn't trust the lady, it was just that traveling alone was very dangerous. The main character left, and the Duke promised to pick her up. Joachim escorted Milady to the academy. Count Ephalentia arrived, realizing that this was the academy where Robelia was currently staying. Her appointment was sent to the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Imperial Palace. Malone learned of this only now, after the Empress's decree was revoked. The first thing my uncle did was ask the closest academy employee to take him to Lady Robelia. Joachim asked the main character what she was doing. Robelia replied that she needed to create the appearance of living at the academy. If the Count found out she'd left the academy after entering, Robelia would be in for a very hard time. Soon Malone found himself right outside Robelia's room, who was carefully sorting through her things at the time. As Malone entered the room, he noticed the knight Joachim Germinus, saying in his mind that he was annoying. Sir Germinus left the room at Robelia's request, as she wanted to speak with Malone personally. Malone already knew about Robelia's meeting with the Empress in the Rose Garden. He wanted to know what the girl had told her and why the Queen had appointed her as her servant. The main character said that Her Majesty asked her why she left the Ephalentia residence and if she was happy, but the answer was negative. Robelia said that the Count loved her very much and allowed her to choose what she wanted. Robelia asked if that didn't sound like helping Ephalentia. She offered her the position of deputy court. Malone himself said that Ephalentia would return to its former glory thanks to public service. Malone shouted that this position was meant for Aina, and he had invested so much into it. Robelia replied that she did not know this, and that she would tell the Empress that she had refused the position. The girl understood that if she refused, Robelia would be in a difficult position. She would have to go against the imperial order because of Aina. The fact that Robelia was appointed to Aina's position shows how hard Malone worked for this. The Queen appointed her to this job because she believed her uncle loved her as his own daughter. Malone asked the main character to learn knitting like before. He meant that the girl would make the Empress quickly get tired of her. When the Count left, Joachim returned and wanted to know if Robelia was okay. She said the knight had been guarding her, and knowing this, the Count wouldn't have done anything to her. Joachim wanted to help her, as Robelia was deeply troubled. And if so, the knight decided to stay with her until the Queen issued a decree. The main character spent 3 days at the academy, awaiting the Empress's decree. Usually, after classes, she went to the library and collected enough books to read all night long, and all this time, Sir Germinus never left Robelia's side. Robelia wanted to know Joachim's opinion on the doctrine of war. War is a series of violent actions. Its goal is to humiliate the enemy and force him to submit. Professor Bridgeneel ran excitedly to Lady Robelia, saying that Her Majesty had drawn up a decree in Robelia's name. The main character wanted to know where she should go. First, she had to go to the faculty department. As Lady Robelia was about to leave, she accidentally bumped into a guy carrying a stack of books. While the young man was collecting all the books, the main character handed him the lost glasses. When the guy ran away, he left behind a very expensive-looking brooch that he accidentally dropped. Robelia wanted to return the lost trinket, but Bridgeneel reminded her that she had to hurry. The professor took the main character to the faculty department and asked her to enter the reception area. Inside the reception room, Countess Dora was already waiting for Robelia with a joyful expression on her face. Helen said it was an order from the Empress to the palace administrator. Robelia noticed the folded letter, assuming it was another order. But in fact, there was a key to the Empress's personal treasury there, and now the main character will have it. Countess Dora added that thanks to him, she would be able to manage the budget and gain access to the Empress's property. Helen had already heard that the Empress had entrusted this job to Robelia. The Queen was counting on her, and if the main character failed, the position would be given to someone else. Robelia said that she would not disappoint Mrs. Elena, and that tomorrow they would get what they needed. Even though the main character has no experience, it seems like she is very experienced and knows everything. Helen wanted to warn the girl about the risks. She still had to overcome all the difficulties. The Empress was not one to easily trust another. The Countess told Miss Robelia that if she was going to serve the Empress, she must understand that they were in the same boat. Helen is smitten with Robelia, so she needs to watch her behavior carefully. Any little thing could offend the Empress, which would damage her reputation. The protagonist understood high society, but she was still too young. The Countess hoped she wouldn't lose her motivation. With a warm smile, Robelia said she would take the Countess's advice into consideration, and Dora realized she had worried for nothing. Joachim asked if it was okay if Miss took walks like that. But now, thanks to her new position, Robelia is able to go out without permission. Duke Jade personally came to the academy when he learned that Lady Robelia had already received news from the Queen. Mr. Parado wanted to take the main character and asked her to tell him what happened. Robelia received the key to the Treasury and was going to visit the bank to get enough funds to buy the stones. When the main character arrived at the royal bank, she was surprised that it was so crowded. One of the bank workers asked Lady Robelia to state her name, and he would lead them to the queue. The more experienced girl told the guy to go. She had to deal with the Duke of Parado. Thanks to Mr. Parado's important title, they gained access to the Queen's Bank's VIP room. The main character had 1,200,000,000 Menikai at her disposal. Robelia was also amazed by the Duke's strength. If she had come on her own, it would have taken her several hours, but thanks to him, everything ended faster. The main character turned to Jade and asked him to return to the mansion first, as she still had a deal to make. That night, in Countess Regretina's mansion, Elan's father was furious that his son had sold the blue diamond for 80 million Maniki. The father didn't care about the curse of the gem. He didn't believe that Elan sold the precious stone for such an unthinkable price. If his son had sold it for 100 million, he would have made the proceeds 20 million higher. Elan had to lie that he made a deal for 160 million Maniki. He couldn't tell the truth because he didn't know what his father would do. The Count immediately asked the next question after the deal was completed. The subject entered the room and said that Miss Robelia wanted to make a deal and asked for a meeting. Elan arrived at the right place and brought the diamond that Robelia wanted to look at first. Although he accepted the deal, Elan did not understand why the main character was willing to pay so much for the diamond. To prevent Robelia from changing her mind, Elan wanted to settle for 100 million. The main character asked if the guy had bought the $80 million gem. As she promised, the main character will pay 15 times the initial amount, 1 and 2 billion Mahini. Elan thanked Robelia for today's deal. Thanks to her, he knew that he had not bought the diamond in vain. Elan heard that Robelia had to face Louis at the academy, but the main character was not aware of it. The guy suggested that Robelia might not remember this. After all, there are a lot of people in the academy. The next morning at the Rose Palace, Empress Helen finally received the diamond. The Queen was very pleased that the main character, who received a position close to her, kept her word. Sir Jereminas arrived at Robelia's academy and brought her a letter sent from the palace. Joachim did not say who the letter was from, and the fact that the Duke personally commissioned Sir Germanus to deliver it speaks to the importance of the letter's contents. The Queen wanted to thank Robelia for the work she had done, and this week, Elena wanted to organize an event in honor of the main character. In addition to this, Robelia will be given 2 and 4 billion mahinis for personal use. As the illegitimate child of a count and the daughter of a gypsy, Robelia was repeatedly humiliated and labeled, but she didn't give up and kept moving forward. Starting without support, the main character met many people who gave Robelia confidence. 2 and 4 billion mahini is more than enough for Robelia's plans. Everything necessary is already there. Mom's voice still echoed in her mind whenever Robelia closed her eyes. She was incredibly lucky to be in such a good position. This time, everything will be different. Robelia is ready to drag Malone to hell, not letting him die so easily. Robelia apologized to the Duke, as she had intended to treat him immediately after meeting with Her Majesty the Empress. Because of the Count, the main character had to stay at the academy, so she arrived late. The Duke said the nightmares subsided after the first treatment, asking Robelia if he had to sleep like that every time now. Robelia didn't know any other way, but there is a possibility to come to consciousness in a dream. Having received a sign, acting in his dreams as he is accustomed to in life, the Duke's mind is sensitive to detail. And when something happens out of the ordinary, he involuntarily tries to understand what's happening. Jade thought it was more suitable for him to look at the time, since he always had a watch with him. The main character asked the Duke to make it a habit to constantly check the time. The same will happen in dreams. The Duke was never interested in relationships, but he apparently had a crush on Robelia. One of the maids said that falling in love with a gypsy's daughter was ridiculous, and that the Duke would fall in love with her faster than with Robelia. But Jade was behind the girl the whole time. The Duke didn't expect something like this to happen in his mansion. The servant allowed herself to make unkind remarks about her master's personal life. The Duke's reputation is not something to be trifled with. The maid's filthy mouth has wounded his honor, for which she will be held accountable. Jade ordered his subject to pack her things and leave the mansion. The price for such behavior is very high, and there will be no letter of recommendation. Servants fired without a letter of recommendation face only one fate. Forget about working for noble families. No one would hire a maid who could cause trouble, especially if it affected their relationship with the Duke of Peridot. It's out of the question for anyone to hire a maid the Duke himself had fired. Jade asked Robelia if everything was okay, wondering how she could act as if nothing had happened. Robelia couldn't understand why the Duke was so angry. Jade declared that saying such a thing in his mansion was the worst thing possible. The Duke was worried about Robelia, which is why he was angry. But precisely because it was hard to admit, the main character chose to pretend she knew nothing. The Duke is a good man. He wasn't just being kind, he cared about Robelia. And this depressed the main character even more. She was surprisingly powerless against his kindness, which the Duke could show to anyone. It felt as if a ray of light had appeared in Robelia's life. Robelia wasn't angry. The maids had nothing to do with her revenge. But the Duke declared that she had clearly been insulted, and that she couldn't turn a blind eye to such inappropriate treatment. The Duke was worried that if he continued in this vein, nothing good would come of it. Robelia was his guest, so he couldn't understand. The main character replied that the only thing that worried her was the return of the Ephalentia estate, as long as it wasn't related to her case. Robelia didn't care what people said behind her back. She didn't want to get used to his warm attitude. Robelia asked not to treat her like that. While for the Duke this was a normal concern, for her it was a big deal. The main character decided to continue treating the Duke of Peridot, not understanding why so much pain was visible on his face. In her dream, Robelia found herself in a palace hall. Judging by the original, a monster attack should be underway. But apparently, the Duke's dreams have changed. Before entering the dream world, any external event can affect consciousness. The ballroom of the royal palace. This meant that this was a dream about a royal banquet, which originally appeared during the 5th session. The banquet was planned to celebrate the victory of the Duke of Peridot. The boy announced that the Emperor and Empress, His Highness the Prince and Duke of Peridot, had arrived. The event had taken place 4 years ago, when Jade was 19. In the dream, the Duke seemed younger. Robelia thought her memory was failing her, But during the sword competition, he looked older. The main event of the dream is supposed to happen in the garden, so Robelia better hurry. Even in the palace hall, Robelia noticed something strange. The Duke looked at her, although the girl quickly discarded this theory, because there were too many people in the palace. But doubts were dispelled again. Mr. Parado approached Robelia and said that he had never met her before. Robelia was charming, but her face was unfamiliar to the Duke. He sent out all the invitations personally, so there was no one Jade didn't know about. The main character convinced herself that everything was fine. If the Duke had even the slightest suspicion, the curse wouldn't manifest. Robelia said it was her first time attending such an event. Obviously, the Duke didn't know her. The main character remarked that the Duke was the main attraction at the banquet, so why did he come to the garden? Jade replied that he felt out of place at such events. Jade said that he became interested in Robelia, and even most likely fell in love with her at first sight. The Duke added that he had spoken frankly. Apparently, this was their first meeting, but somehow he felt as if he had known Robelia before. Then it occurred to Jade that this feeling was love. Robelia was surprised, because the Duke remembered the contractual relationship in real life. Robelia considered this impossible, because the Duke could only remember this if he was not in a lucid dream. Suddenly, the attack began. Robelia needed to find the curse mark and get rid of it as quickly as possible. Kneeling, Duke Parado turned to the main character and asked her to call someone from the hall. Robelia understood that the Duke was in great shock, as this was his first attack. Even from the sidelines, such a sight would make one's blood run cold. Jade felt like he was turning into a monster. It was terrifying to feel the monster slowly consuming his personality. The Duke apologized as he grabbed Robelia's hand and asked Robelia to help, revealing the mark on his neck. The Duke considered himself to be terrible in this but Robelia convinced him that this was not so, and he would not harm her. Robelia closed the eyes of the Duke of Parado, and he finally calmed down, meaning the treatment could begin. The main character used the blood from her finger and asked Jade to be patient, because soon everything would be over. After the treatment, Jade fell asleep. If the dream fully conveyed the suffering he experienced during the first attack, the Duke must have had a hard time. Back in reality, Robelia was quite tired and wanted to go to bed, leaving Jade sleeping on the bed. The Duke took the protagonist's hand and asked her not to leave. It was so easy for Jade to ask for help from a stranger. In moments like these, Robelia felt how different they were. There were people in her life who not only didn't help her in times of trouble, but only pulled her deeper into a dark abyss. Because of people like that, the main character no longer trusted anyone. Regardless, Robelia envied the Duke. When morning came, the maid brought a tub of water for the Duke of Parado's morning bath. But Robelia was sleeping at that time, and Jade asked the girl to come later so as not to wake the main character. Mrs. Aina received an invitation to a reception from the Imperial Palace, but the maid wanted to say something else. According to the Count, Robelia has taken the position of palace representative and will be present at the reception. Aina was not bothered by this, because it was her duty to look after the missing family member. The girl considered herself the legitimate child of the Ephalentia family, the most kind-hearted and beautiful candidate in line for the throne, of which there is no doubt. Apparently, the sister had to leave the house because she couldn't bear the feeling of inferiority, as evidenced by Robelia constantly taking away what is rightfully hers. Aina believed her sister's position was insignificant. In that case, she, the future Empress, would have to pretend to be a family member's protector, which constantly went beyond the pale. The Empress's reception would take place in a week. The Duke was still thinking about how angry Robelia must have been about the maid's insults, but decided he shouldn't have been so harsh. Jade called Gerald into his room. The man already knew he had been summoned because of the recent scandal at the estate. The Duke wanted to understand why Gerald had allowed things to go so far. Jade invited Miss Robelia to be a guest at the Parado estate and told him to take care of her so that she would not want for anything during her stay. Jade hadn't expected his butler to misunderstand the order. Gerald understood that he had been overconfident, had gotten caught up in the rumors swirling around, and had ultimately treated Miss Robelia lightly. Although the man saw the maid's arrogant behavior, he simply turned a blind eye. The blame for this incident lies entirely with him and nothing else. The herald apologized to the Duke. He realized his guilt too late and is ready to bear punishment. Jade said he'd trust the man this time. Harold must be prepared to work overtime. When the reception took place, the Queen thanked everyone for accepting the invitation. Mrs. Elena wanted to introduce the man by calling Robelia to her. The protagonist was delighted to welcome their country's only moon. The Queen allowed the protagonist to stand beside her. A few weeks ago, while strolling through the garden of the Rose Palace, Elena had chanced upon Robelia, and because of her impressive resourcefulness, she wanted to have her by her side. Therefore, the Empress entrusted Robelia with the position of palace representative. Ina couldn't understand how it happened that her sister stood next to Her Majesty. Ina couldn't believe she could so easily take her place. It was the most honorable place, reserved for non-royal individuals. Even Ina, from the family of Count Ephalentia, had never had the opportunity to stand there. Elena said Robelia would become her right-hand woman. Today's reception was dedicated to the main character. The Empress had prepared a variety of activities so that everyone could enjoy the reception. Ina approached her sister and congratulated her on her position as a representative, also asking to have a dialogue with her. The lady said she wanted to give Robelia a chance. She left the Ephalentia family to go to the academy without saying a word to her. After that, they met for the first time at the opera house. Ina had no idea that Robelia and Jade had become so close. Anger boiled up in Ina because of the shame that Robelia brought upon her. But she forgave the main character. Ina said that they were sisters, and she was told to look after Robelia, so Ina gave her a chance to return to the Ephalentia family. The already renowned poet Wilhelm, who had participated in Countess Dora's salon party, came to the Queen's reception. Even the pickiest literary critics did not skimp on praise at the time. Wilhelm is amazing, despite his young age. William rushed to perform at the Queen's command. His angelic voice filled the palace, and even the highest nobles were captivated by the young talent. Everyone recited only tedious verses in praise of Helena. But of all the people she had ever heard, Wilhelm's voice was the most beautiful, and the verses touched her to the depths of her soul. The Empress added that Helen had spoken well of Wilhelm, and the poems were wonderful. Even the Queen liked them. Elena asked the poet to rise. The Empress wanted to know how the young man had written such masterpieces. Wilhelm said he wanted to share with others the courage his benefactress had given him. The Empress wanted to repay the benefactor with gifts for giving her ears such delight. The boy added that she helped him dedicate a poem to the Queen and helped him gather his strength when he was scared to perform in front of a large audience. The Empress had already heard that Wilhelm had recited his poems for the first time at Helen's salon party. Countess Dora said that, thanks to Robelia, the party was a great success. Immediately after these thoughts, William broke the silence by saying that his patroness is Lady Robelia. The Empress was overjoyed, noting that this girl was incredibly talented. Robelia once again exceeded the Queen's expectations. Robelia wasn't in the hall and wanted to know where she had gone. One of the guests reported that Lady Robelia had gone into the lounge with Lady Aina. The Empress wanted to bring Robelia herself, because there was so much to learn from this child. As soon as the Queen entered the restroom, Lady Aina told Robelia to resign from her position as royal representative. Elena suddenly changed her expression to a more irritated one, asking who dared to question her decision. Aina could not have expected such a sudden visit from the Queen, and immediately bowed her head, saying that these were words spoken in a fit of emotion. Robelia also apologized to the Queen, suggesting that in a private conversation with Lady Aina, she said something she shouldn't have. The Queen didn't care that Aina was Ephalentius's daughter. She was to be punished for her insolent behavior with the imperial decree. If Elena announced the punishment, the attention of the aristocracy would be directed to Aina, not Robelia. And besides, she herself did not want this. The Queen allowed Aina to go unpunished, but if such a situation were to happen again, Elena was ready to vent all her anger. Her Majesty and Lady Robelia returned to the hall. The entire estate rushed into discussion about William's patroness. Some nobles didn't believe she had managed to become the Queen's favorite, despite being a commoner. But there were rumors that Robelia might be the legitimate daughter of the Ephalentia family. Many people had doubts at the time. The main character wouldn't have been so modest and well-mannered if aristocratic blood hadn't flowed through her veins. Earlier, in a conversation with Malone, he said that Robelia should not take away what belongs to Aina. Malone told his daughter that as soon as the Empress realized how vile the main character was, she would, without thinking twice, take away the palace representative's tablet from Robelia. After the Empress introduces Robelia to high society, Aina must demonstrate the good manners of Ephalentius's legitimate child against her background. When Aina returned to the estate, she came screaming to Malone, saying that in the end, the Empress gave Robelia a place next to her. Malone was furious when his daughter began blaming her father for the failure of their plan. To calm Aina down, the father decided to hit his daughter, which quickly stopped the lady's screams. Aina wanted to know why he did it. Malone said that he raised Aina, and this is how she repaid him. At the salon party, Aina was disgraced, and she came as if nothing had happened. And now Aina left when she heard rumors that Robelia is the legitimate daughter of Ephalentius. Malone invested a lot of money to win the Empress's favor for Aina, and she once again disgraced her father. Malone continued, "Everything Ephalentius had wasn't Aina's property. Clothes, food, even the way everyone spoke of Aina were all thanks to her father. The father ordered his daughter to stay in her room for a month, and she would not get food until she realized her mistakes. Aina couldn't believe what had happened, because she was his daughter. Just like her sister in Aina's hands, she herself was a puppet in Malone's hands. The Duke and his servant were gardening. Robelia came into the garden and addressed Jade. The main character and the Duke met for the first time after the maid's words, and Robelia still felt awkward. Jade said he always felt like Robelia handled every difficult task like it was nothing to her. Robelia needed to draw a line, but she couldn't hurt the Duke of Parato. Jade decided to apologize first for yesterday. He raised his voice because he was worried about Robelia. The Duke said he'd said all sorts of things in the heat of the moment, without trying to understand her. Jade would be more careful in the future. At that moment, Robelia felt a strange calm. She didn't understand why, but assumed it was because they had once again extended their hand to her first. The main character also apologized, and for some reason the girl's heart warmed after this conversation. Robelia said she was going to open her own business. Jade thought she was talking about a boutique, but it had to be something more sophisticated. Robelia had plans to go to Mdanian, a mining area in the west that is quite dangerous. Those who have failed in business and lost everything settle in these lands, so they are not known for their safety. Even with large capital, it is impossible to start a mineral extraction operation, and the risks of such an undertaking are incredibly high. It doesn't matter how much Robelia invests if she doesn't ultimately make a profit. All that's left is the earth and stones. The main character understood this risk, but if you succeed, there is no better way to get rich. Jade added that this place almost entirely belongs to Count Ephalentia. Robelia's decision seemed strange, because she wanted to get rich in secret from the Count. Robelia had a good mine in mind, and Count Ephalentia wouldn't know that she had bought it. This time, the main character intended to play a game that would only benefit her. To do this, she had a request for Jade. The Duke understood that Robelia had a good plan again, so he decided to gladly help her. The herald brought Robelia the maps at her request. They took longer than expected because they were created with special care, with the date and origin falsified. The main character didn't know Gerald had such connections. The man said his actions would be limited. The Duke again inquired whether the commoner's ID would be suitable. Robelia said she was also a commoner, asking him to convey her gratitude to the Duke. The aristocrats were too visible. The herald bowed before Robelia and apologized. He had not performed his duties as a butler with due diligence and had treated her rudely. The butler was ashamed that he made the heroine go through discussions and insults while she was staying with the Duke. The herald wanted Robelia to come up with a punishment for him, and he would meekly accept the words of the main character. The main character was fine. She asked Gerald not to worry too much about what happened. After all, let's face it, it wasn't his fault. The butler thanked Robelia and wished to make every effort to ensure that life in the estate would flow without flaws from now on. Soon, some of the maids arrived to transform the main character, which they did brilliantly. Now Robelia's personality became that of Catherine Hayward. Robelia will use this appearance in Mdanian to organize her business. The maid brought Mr. Jereminas into the room, but he did not recognize the main character. Joachim realized that the words about the train with the fake ID were true. Now came the part of the knight's transformation. the maids planned to make Sir Germanus into Lady Robelia's brother. The main character was surprised by the power of cosmetics, because even she did not recognize herself. The herald entered the room and asked if Robelia would like to meet the Duke in her new identity. After all, to carry out the plan, it is necessary to make it so that even her lover does not recognize her. At this time, the Duke of Parato was discussing business deals in his room, and when it was over, he decided to return to the others. The herald noted how busy the Duke was today and offered him some tea to help him sleep. Lady Robelia, in the guise of Catherine, held a tray with the drink. Jade immediately recognized Lady Robelia, despite the maid's attempts to disguise her, so they sent the girl out in makeup to ensure her performance. The Duke also realized that the maids had changed Robelia's appearance and suggested that she change her perfume. But this wasn't the only thing that revealed the main character's identity. Harold was acting very strange. He handed over a fake ID today, so Jade didn't expect that. It seemed to Jade that even if Robelia had changed her perfume and he had met her on the street without knowing anything, the Duke would still have recognized his beloved. They were bound only by a contract, but for him, Robelia was like salvation. Nightmares haunted him every day. The curse manifested itself more and more frequently, and the Duke gradually lost the will to fight it. The days when he turned into a monster were terrifying. Robelia had freed him from such a life, and they had never had a proper conversation. Jade was deeply grateful to Lady Robelia for the peace she had given him. Therefore, the Duke sincerely intended to help the lady more than they had agreed upon, to at least balance the contract, which isn't slanted in the main character's favor. Even though Robelia said she didn't trust anyone, Jade was going to try until he earned her trust. Before leaving, Duke Parato gave Robelia a bracelet, sending her on her long journey with the amulet. Soon they arrived at one of the stations along the route. Joachim said that the glass ceiling at the Ermont station was famous for its beauty. The maid told Sir Germanus to remain in his new role as Kelvin. Kelvin hired. Joachim Jeremiah was in charge of security. Marina Mary, Is Dienso, the Haird's servant, who was in charge of makeup. Ermont Station was built by James Ephalentia. Mining and railroads are the Ephalentia family's main sources of income. Previously, the empire had no railroads or trains. My father became fascinated with trains the moment he saw one, and after receiving permission from the imperial family, he began importing them. It's just a station where the train stops, but Jade was so dedicated to his work that he put a lot of effort into its construction. Having reached the train, Kelvin helped Catherine climb onto the train, and the group headed to the desired city. During the 4 days of travel, even in a luxurious compartment, Lady Robelia was shaking and nauseous. Mary tried her best to help her. To further help Robelia's situation, Joachim brought lemon water and mints. Apparently, Lady Robelia was having a very difficult time traveling. Mary couldn't understand why they couldn't send a representative instead of going to the mines in person. The protagonist replied that the representative couldn't do what she intended. As the group knew, Robelia had managed to become the palace representative, but she had neither status nor experience, so no one expected much from Robelia. If the mines really become the property of Her Majesty, the main character will be able to gain more trust. Briefly describing the upcoming deal, Robelia intended to buy a mine. Everything was legal, but unnecessary noise could be a problem. Therefore, it was necessary to be careful to ensure their identities were not revealed. Even during the stop, the train shook incredibly, worsening Lady Robelia's condition. The conductor announced that they had arrived at the western mining region, Mdanian. Finally, the main character could get off the train and breathe some fresh air. As soon as the group disembarked from the train, merchants descended on them from all sides. Mary was worried that Lady Robelia's wig might fly off. The main character thought about this too, wondering what would have happened if they had been discovered immediately upon arrival. Having finished with the luggage, if the group still had strength left, Robelia suggested looking around Mdanian. Joachim wanted to know where they were headed. Since it was already evening, Robelia intended to go out for something to eat. The group found themselves at a diner called the White Whale. Joachim decided to go there to see if they were open. At that moment, Robelia heard strange sounds in the alley. A man was collecting debts from a beggar whose family owed 10 million maniki. In fact, the young man owed 2 million, The man told him to give at least 30,000, which the guy did not have. Suddenly, a black-haired guy appeared behind the main character, who said that he had not seen her before in Mdanian or Mdanian. The guy kept saying that Robelia was there at the wrong time, suggesting that she might know Joel. Mary stood up for Robelia, telling the stranger to take his dirty hands off my Lady Catherine. The guy had no intention of coddling the girls and forcefully threw Mary to the ground, upsetting Robelia. The main character reached out to Mary, but the stranger grabbed her hand, intending to continue the interrogation. At this time, the herald was sorting through documents in the Duke's room. Jade asked that those concerning Mdanian be kept separately. The guy grabbed Robelia by the cheeks and said that he hadn't caught a big catch for a long time, suggesting that he would get a lot for the main character. The main character was afraid that their identities might be revealed, so she decided to stab the stranger in the leg. Robelia tried to escape, but the guy quickly got up and was going to take revenge on the girl. Suddenly, the stranger's accomplice noticed his head fall to the ground with a collapse. The Robelia came to the rescue. Sir Joachim apologized for his late arrival, drawing his sword to defend the main character. Realizing they were in a disadvantageous situation, the leader decided to flee with his intermediary. Mary was fine, as she only got her clothes dirty, but she was more worried about Robelia's condition. Mary wanted to call a doctor, but Robelia assured her that everything was fine. They were just minor bruises and would heal quickly. Robelia was to speak to the debtor, calling Mr. Joel Primer by name. Joel Primer, Silverstone's son Joel, approached limping on one leg. The main character had a request for Joel, but he was not eager to interact with her, since he himself was barely making ends meet. Robelia was willing to pay off her 10 million debt if Joel arranged a meeting for her with his father, Silverstone. Joel said he wouldn't bring bad people to his father. The guy isn't ready to sell his family for 10 million. The protagonist decided not to miss out on a chance, handing Joel the pendant. Robelia asked him to give it to Silverstone when her father saw her, so he could decide for himself whether to date Robelia or not. Joel was dubious, thinking that 10 million meniki for just one thing seemed strange. Viscount Rohan received documents about Catherine's identity. She was going to buy the 9th mine, from which the man only has problems. Rohan said that as far as he knew, the Hazard family went bankrupt several generations ago because they raised capital to buy. Sir Joachim, with a disdainful look, asked the Viscount why he was asking so much about someone else's property. The man apologized, but as a seller, he had to verify the buyer's solvency before signing the contract. Robelia replied that they had recently discovered an inheritance from her great-grandfather. Robelia handed the Viscount a document about the government bonds of the Western Kingdom. A few years ago, there was a real silk boom there. The Viscount said that if he had his father's bonds, he would have bought such a mine himself. Robelia replied that they thought it was just a piece of paper and were about to throw it in the furnace. But her father recognized the seal of the Western Kingdom. Viscount Rohan believed that the buyers were very naive and had no understanding of mining. To begin, the man drew up a draft of the contract. Even though the buyers were confident, they needed to read it first. The Viscount wasn't joking about the agreement. The man had no idea, and for him, 700 million meniki seemed like a lucky break. But for Robelia, it was incredibly cheap. The main character put her seal on it. 5 days before the contract expired, the Viscount intended to report this to Count Ephalentia, seeking his permission. Usually such a matter takes 2 weeks, but the Count would soon be arriving on a visit to Mdanian, and Rohan was going to report to him personally. This certainly wasn't the case in the original. At least 3 years had passed since Ina started her first business in the mines, and the replica of her first trip to Mdanian appeared. Ina suggested digging a little deeper into mine number 9, whose operations had been shut down due to a huge shortage, and in just a week she had received a huge sum. Robelia suggested that the shift in events occurred because she was behaving differently than in the original. Malone said he raised Ina like a bird in a luxurious cage. This time, Ina had to keep a close eye on everything in the Mdanian to preserve the Ephalentia family. Ephalentia's office in Mdanian. The employer refused to hire Father Joel. Silverstone was asking not for himself, but for the young guys who worked under him. The man replied that they weren't involved in charity, but in business. People should have a conscience, right? 15 years ago, Silverstone disagreed with Malone. The man asked if he looked like the type to do such a thing after decades of devotion to the Ephalentia family. His father met Joel and asked him what he was doing there. Joel decided to say that he was asked to deliver the pendant. Silverstone immediately recognized the pendant. It belonged to Mrs. Julia. His father asked Joel who had told him to give it to him. Joachim told Robelia that even in the Information Guild he could not find out anything about the daughter of Count Ephalentius, except that she would be attending Baroness Ibiane's party. If Ina came to Mdanian because she was behaving differently than in the original, then the events of the quarrel with the queen were probably the reason. Robelia thought Malone had brought Ina to restore her position. After all, in Mdanian, where Ephalentius's influence was strongest, Ina's popularity would quickly soar. In that scenario, they would be able to settle all matters in the capital. Joachim replied that in that case, he would plan everything so as not to accidentally run into Count Ephalentia. Mary opened the door and announced that Mr. Silverstone Primer and Joel had arrived. Silverstone immediately recalled the previous events, how he tried to cheer up little Robelia. The man wanted to know what she was doing there. The main character came to see Mr. Primer. Mary and Joachim hurried out of the office. Lady Robelia wanted to speak with Silverstone personally. The main character asked Sir to tell her about that time. After the death of Count Ephalentia, or James, Silverstone disobeyed Malone, and he expelled him, accusing him of embezzling state funds. And even the miners who worked under his leadership were fired for various reasons. And with all the business in the Ephalentia mines, none of them could find work anymore. As a result, half of them, along with their families, left Mdanian. Silverstone went to Malone and asked him to hire at least other people again, but he only received humiliation and ridicule for my position. Silverstone is one of the few who has not bowed to Malone after his father's death. In the source, he also found Robelia and asked her to return the business in the mines in an honest way. The main character also fell for Malone's trick and believed she was an illegitimate child. But shortly before her father's death, her mother told her how Malone had taken everything from them through trickery and violence. Therefore, Robelia intended to return all of Ephalentia's property that belonged to her. And after that, she would repay Malone for all his actions with something worse than death. And to do this, Robelia needed to start by bringing back business to the mines. That's why she needed Mr. Primer's help. The main character plans to regain what Silverstone lost by handing him a contract of employment, asking him to gather the men back together and work for her in the mine. Silverstone said the proposal was inappropriate, as he was already devoted to Lady Robelia. He swore allegiance to James as his benefactor and would believe and follow his daughter's words without a doubt. The main character knew about Silverstone's devotion to his father, but today she saw for the first time that he trusted his daughter as much as her father. Mary said that we should tell the two of them about what happened today. They had already refused 3 times. Mary added that all that was needed was to sign the contract for the mine. The group arrived at the estate to finalize the contract. Viscount Roan was already waiting for them and wanted to invite the boys to a party. Roan added that it was their first time here, which was why they refused. This is Mdanian, so they need to get used to enjoying parties with aristocrats and ordinary businessmen. If Mr. Kelvin cannot come, Lady Catherine will take his place. As he left, Roan said that he expected to see them. Joachim suggested going to the party, as Catherine would be introduced to Count Ephalentia if she decided to go. The main character said that there is always a chance of getting caught, and if the contract requires meeting with the Count, then Robelia is ready to take the risk. Lady Catherine arrived at the party, and looking around, she noticed that Malone was not there yet. Theodore said that if he had known that there was a girl like Catherine here, Theodore would have rushed earlier. The main character didn't want to get involved with Theodore, but he put his hand up, saying that Catherine needed to know his name first. Theodore is the eldest son of Earl Regrighton. He wanted to dance with Lady Catherine, asking what city she was from. Robelia said that Theodore was mistaken, since she was a commoner. Theodore flared up with anger and accused the girl of deception. Elin stood up for Catherine and said that this girl was his arriving partner, which calmed his brother down. Elin apologized for his brother, adding that he had made a big mistake. He simply wanted to put an end to his older brother's misbehavior. Apparently, the successor's place would go to the younger brother. Elin said he felt bad. His brother was always embarrassing them. He suggested that Catherine stay with him. The main character thought that Island was pretending to be nice to everyone, but it turned out that this was not the case. Malone arrived at the party with Lady Aina, introducing her to Roan, the head of the Mdanian branch. Aelin realized Lady Catherine was interested in Malone. She said that among the businessmen who didn't know about the Earl's family, the main character asked a counter-question, whether Elan was interested in Lady Aina. They say that if there's hope in a bond and you're confident in it, you should take it at any cost. But lately, Aelin has been questioning whether that's the right thing to do. Aelin had something that was bothering him. Robelia couldn't understand why he'd suddenly started talking about bonds. Assuming that rumors of Hayard's success had already spread, since Robelia was asking about Lady Aina, Aelin added that Aina was a sucker for attention and wouldn't ignore anyone. Aelin noticed his brother was distracted by something else, so Robelia was free to go. For this, the main character thanked Aelin. When the lady left, Aelin blushed and wondered what kind of nonsense he had said in front of Catherine. Lady Aina's visit to Mdanian could have been for training. Robelia believed that she was indeed planning to begin her training as an heir. So, instead of the position of palace representative, Aina will be given the business in the mines. This happened about 3 years earlier. From now on, Robelia should also keep in mind how nervous Malone will be when his property is taken away. Viscount Rowan found Lady Catherine and asked her to come over to introduce the girl to Count Ephalentia. Rowan said that, as he had said, before him was the daughter of the Hayard family, who wanted to acquire the 9th mine using the bonds of the Western Kingdom. Despite the protagonist's determination, fear lingers in her memory. The disguise was perfect, so all that was left was to appear sincere. Malone said the 9th mine had the greatest potential. Malone treasured it most, and now Catherine was planning to buy it. The main character bowed and said that it was an honor for her to meet Count Ephalentius. Malone hesitated, asking why Lady Catherine was sweating. This completely shattered the protagonist's confidence. Meanwhile, in the mansion, Mary and Joachim came to the decision that nothing would work out, and they needed to meet Robelia. But Malone didn't recognize Catherine's identity, but just laughed and said that young entrepreneurs are so nervous when they start their first big business. Malone asked them to put aside their fears, since people also lived in Mdanian. He admired Catherine's intelligence, as she intended to buy the mine for 700 million maniki. Malone wanted to sign the contract right away, asking Roan to bring the documents quickly. When the main character received the contract, she went back and met Lady Aina on her way. Aina immediately recognized her sister and asked the girl directly if this was Robelia. To avoid revealing her identity, the main character said that Aina was mistaken. Aina added that she waited because she wanted to talk to her sister, but Robelia kept walking. At that moment, Joachim and Mary arrived, forcing Aina to interrupt the conversation. Sir Jeremias had come because Robelia had been absent for a long time. Aina didn't dare reveal her sister's secret if she didn't want to. The main character didn't understand how she was recognized if even Malone hadn't noticed. Robelia heard that Aina was fixated on her, and as it turned out, she didn't know her sister that well. Joachim and Mary noticed the contract, surprised that Robelia had succeeded. The contract was signed, and all that remained was to pay the remaining money so that the mine would be fully transferred to the main character's ownership. Joachim started cooking, saying that in recognition of Robelia's hard work, he had decided to prepare a special dish. Mary stated that as a servant of the Parado family, she could not lose, proposing a cooking duel. In the end, Sir Jeremias' dish turned out to be much more successful. Mary was upset, since she did everything according to Hilda's recipe. Mary had never been responsible for cooking. Her duties included serving guests. But she never imagined that she would lose to Sir Jeremias the night. The main character felt betrayed for some reason, but said that Mary did a wonderful job. Joachim used to cook every day with his younger siblings to feed them. But after he began working for the Duke, their family's situation improved, and this need no longer existed. Mary supposed that now, in his role as Lady Robelia's older brother, Sir Jeremias felt as if he were cooking for his younger sister again. Joachim liked the idea, and to avoid seeming strange, he went to get salt. For a moment, the knight thought he didn't like Robelia. Silverstone handed its top workers a contract of employment, and they decided to celebrate at the White Whale Diner. This time, the mine belongs to Ephalentia, so they will definitely be able to work. Malone praised Viscount Roan for the excellent deal. He hadn't thought there would be fools who would buy a dead mine. The trip to Mdanian had yielded good results. Joachim went to the bank with Viscount Rohan. After verifying the bank check and its contents, they would be able to complete the transaction. One of the workers had to clarify that the deal was being concluded between Mr. Hayter and the head of the Ephalentia branch in Mdanian, Viscount Roan, for the ninth mine at a price of 700 million maniki. Everything was correct, and the worker said that they would soon deliver a certificate about the change of ownership of the ninth mine. Roan said that for this contract, they had previously withdrawn workers from the mine, so it is now possible to start work immediately. After the deal, Sir Jeremias went to Joel, handing him a copy of the certificate. With it, they would be able to enter the mine. After handing the certificate over to his father, if they say it was Catherine's request, Silverstone will immediately get to work. Once at the mine, the workers were not thrilled, as the ninth mine was considered closed. Did you like the recap? Want a continuation? Write Part 2 in the comments.